Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I am joined by author, educator, and priestess of the divine feminine, Dr. Vivien Monroe, to discuss the dark goddess. In a wide-ranging conversation, Vivien and I explore the manifestations of the dark goddess, what she has to teach us, especially in light of the climate crisis, and the power of embodiment, sex, and disruption. Also, please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, or the YouTube channel. Also, hit that like button and notification bell. Your support is truly appreciated. Vivien Monroe, PhD, is an author, educator, and priestess of the divine feminine. She integrates her training as a priestess and gifts as an intuitive and channel with decades of study of spirituality, mysticism, and personal growth. Vivien founded the Women's Mystery School because she believes that knowledge is power, and through the mentorship of women leaders, visionaries, and healers, women can embark upon a path of spiritual emancipation and empowerment. The school offers community, resources, and wisdom teachings to encourage women to discover and reclaim their divine feminine lineage and become the wise women the world needs. Vivien, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you. I am very excited to be here. I have been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah, me too. I've been wanting to have a conversation with someone about the dark goddess.
Yes.
It's been on the back burner for quite a while. So I was so excited to find you and your work, and let's get it going.
Yes.
Let's get it going.
Yay.
So I thought that the first question I should ask is, who or what is the dark goddess? Is it a specific goddess? Is it a type of goddess? Is it an aspect of the divine feminine? How do you explain this?
All of the above. The dark goddess is really a category that many goddesses can fall within. It can also be seen as an aspect of the divine feminine and a subconscious archetype as well. So dark goddess, dark does not refer to negative or bad or anything like that. It's more what gets kept in the dark, that like it's not in the light of our consciousness, it's not brought out into the greater world, or at least not without pushback and shame. So a lot of the qualities that make the dark goddess dark are the rage, the anger, the unrestrained sexuality, the fierceness, all of those really big things that people can be scared of is really what she embodies. Plus, she's also very chthonic. So she's related to the earth. She's not necessarily a sky and light goddess, but deeply connected to the earth. And so a lot of her, I don't know, celebrations or people engaging with her, again, are engaging on this level of sex, ferocity, anger, retribution, blood. Like it's all the really heavy, deep, big stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the reasons I was so excited about talking about this is because it seems so relevant in so many ways to our current moment.
Yes.
Because there's this aspect of suppression, of psychological suppression, but I think other forms of suppression. I mean, just suppression of the female in general,
Yeah.
and all of the things that the female is associated with, like
Right.
nature and whatnot.
And the dark goddess is the pushback against that of like no more suppression, done. It's yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like this is her time.
Yes. Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dig in a little bit and maybe look at some examples of dark goddesses. Do you have a
Okay.
favorite?
Well, yes, it's hard to choose, but the one that I have the most connection with is Lilith. She was, yeah, my first big one who I just dove into and actually wrote my master's thesis about her. So I'm very intimate with her. And as for other dark goddesses, the list is so long because you
Right.
can find them in multiple cultures. So there's Ereshkigal, Inanna's sister. You could consider Pele, Medusa, Kali, Sekhmet, Oya, Helkwe, Coatlicue, the Morrigan, Babylon, the Irenes, who are also known as the Furies.
Mhm.
So it's just, they're everywhere.
Right, right, right. Well, let's dig into it. Let's why don't we start with Lilith? For anyone who is unfamiliar with Lilith, who was Lilith?
Hmm. Well, the first reference we have to her dates back to Sumerian times.
Mhm.
And she's connected with the goddess Inanna,
Mm.
and she's referred to as the handmaiden of Inanna. And sometimes scholars think that she's another aspect of Inanna.
Mhm.
So she has really ancient origins. Where she's most well known is in the Jewish tradition, which talks about how Lilith was the first woman before Eve.
Mhm.
So Adam and Lilith were made at the same time from the same clay, equals. And Adam still wanted to have the upper hand. And specifically in this story, when they were having sex, Adam always insisted on being on top, and Lilith wanted to be on top. She's like, let me have a go. And Adam was just, nope, I get to be on top. I'm, above in this relationship. And Lilith said, no, I don't think so. We are equal. We were made at the same time from the same clay. You're not better than me, and you're not more than me. And Adam refused to consider her an equal.
Mm.
So she said the secret name of God and flew out of the Garden of Eden and went to the Red Sea, where she frolicked and cavorted as much as she wanted, they say with demons.
Mm.
And Adam became really lonely and asked God, like, please bring Lilith back. I'm sad. So God sent three angels to go and talk her into coming back to the Garden of Eden. And she held her ground. She's like, if I am not going to be treated as an equal, I'm not going back. I will not return to somewhere where I am not respected. And the angels threatened her and said, well, if you don't, hundreds of your babies are going to die every day. There'll be demons. You're a demon. People are going to ban you and banish you. And she said, okay. She would not compromise her self respect and would not take less than being equal. So then she became demonized by patriarchal religions,
Mm.
and Eve was made thereafter and made from Adam so that she really was second and a helpmate to Adam instead of an equal.
Mm.
And yeah, and Lilith has just been shamed, demonized, and blamed ever since. Partially, I believe, because she is a threatening role model for women, threatening to the patriarchy.
Mm.
Because here is an embodiment of the divine feminine refusing to compromise on her worth, knowing her equality, knowing her value, and refuses to submit.
Mm.
And so if women take that on as a model, then it could cause a lot of, rocking the boat.
Right.
So instead, it's easier to demonize her
Mm.
and make her scary so that people don't seek her out, don't want to learn from her, don't pay attention to her teachings.
Right. Yeah, I find that very fascinating. And I'm a little bit familiar with Lilith, and I think a lot of the stories come out of the Talmud, I think.
Mhm.
But forgive me, please. I can't help myself. I do have an observation I want to make, but for the listeners, I don't know that a lot of people recognize that there are two creation stories in Genesis.
Mhm.
You have Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
Yep.
And Genesis 1 is, they use different names of God. So in Genesis 1, it's the Elohim, and it speaks in the plural when it
Yep.
says, let us make man and woman in our image, and they're made at the same time.
Yeah.
And then Genesis 2, the name of God is Yahweh. And this is where Adam is made first, and there's a different order of the creation. And
Mhm.
then Eve is made last.
Yeah.
And it was trying to reconcile these that
Yes.
the Jewish scholars kind of drew upon the Sumerian tradition and said, well, Adam had a
Yeah.
wife first. But one of the things that I was thinking of, and this is along what you were saying, is that I know that an interpretation has been that since Eve is made out of the rib of Adam and the rib comes from the side, it's supposed to suggest that man and woman exist side by side, that
Hmm.
it's not supposed to be hierarchical. But then it's like whoever was writing these texts couldn't help themselves, because then they have to put the blame of all suffering on the woman.
Right. Yeah. Where
Because
was the side by side there?
right, right, right,
You
right,
know?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So what is it that appeals to you about Lilith? Is it that refusal to submit? Is it the what is it?
It is the refusal to submit. It's also that she liberated herself for herself.
Mm,
She didn't wait for someone else to free her, and she didn't do it, to help someone else. It was her, and
mm,
that she had complete agency and would not compromise herself. I love that. And then the other piece, which I've experienced a lot in my own life, is the fact that she lived in the Garden of Eden, which is supposedly paradise.
mm,
So you would think, well, you're in paradise. You should be happy. Why would you leave that? Like, that's insane. And in translating it into my life, it's, well, there have been times where I've been in situations where it seems like I've got a good thing. It seems like, according to others' standards, I'm living in paradise. But inside, I'm not.
mm,
Inside, I am unfulfilled. I am angry. I am not seen. I am not respected. And so I have to do something about that. And a lot of times I find that people want a reason. Well, why, like specifically, let's say in relationship, why are you leaving? You're not being hurt. You're not being abused. You're not being taken advantage of. So why stay? It's like, it's not enough to say because I'm not fulfilled, because I'm not being truly seen and held as an equal.
mm,
People tend to want a reason that they can grab onto that justifies leaving.
mm.
And she didn't need that.
Yeah.
And that is very inspiring to me and gives me permission to, put my needs first. I'm not saying be completely vain and self-centered and forget everyone else, but we do need to live from our own health and well-being first
Mm-hmm.
in order to show up at all for anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good message, not just for women, but for all people, I think.
Yeah.
I
And,
can,
the situation can be anything. It can be a job, it can be a relationship, it can be a home, it can be anything.
well, and it seems that so often that when people aren't acting from that kind of autonomy and
Hmm.
that personal authority, that they get blocked because their spirit is not allowed to shine at its brightest as
Yeah.
it was meant to.
Yeah. And I've always found it interesting that she knew the secret name of God.
Right.
That's what she said before she got out. So, how would someone who's so demonized and bad and evil actually know the secret name of God?
Right.
So, again, like, it
Yeah.
hints at there's a little more going on than what's
Mm-hmm.
spoken about.
Yeah, and I know that she also, like you had said, there's this tradition of her being associated with giving just birth to demons and whatnot, and she gets associated with the succubus, I think,
Yes. Yeah.
which is this. It's a weird sexual, I mean, it's a natural phenomena that gets demonized in some ways,
Oh, yeah.
that she's
Yeah.
doing this to spawn more demons.
Exactly. Again, being the blame is being put on her. And so it's, if men have nocturnal emissions, it's, well, Lilith came to visit them and
Right.
stole it to make demon babies. And there's also stories of if a man is with Lilith, then he'll never be able to have his sexual appetites ever fulfilled again. No woman will ever stand up to that. And so he's just going to wither away in desire and unfulfilled longing forever.
Right.
And,
Right.
there's just so many different stories, and amulets were made to keep her away, specifically in nurseries, to
Mm,
keep her away from babies.
mm,
So there was a lot of fear around and stories about her being a baby killer, which again, I think is propaganda.
mm,
And it might refer, we don't know, to women's abilities to choose whether or not to be a mother and taking action
mm,
if they chose not to.
mm.
And then it's like, oh, well, Lilith did it. It's
Yeah.
not me. Lilith did it.
Yeah. Now, was Lilith associated with witches at all?
Yes. I mean, witches, a lot of witches do claim her and love her and sort of bring her in,
Yeah.
but it's in the ancient historical documents, there isn't that link
Okay.
because there weren't necessarily witches
Right. Right.
labeled
Right.
and named,
Right.
but she's had quite the, I don't know, adventures. Like you said, she gets associated with succubus and with
Mhm.
vampires and
Right.
with demons. And originally she was associated with wind. She
Mm,
was the element of the fierce desert wind storm.
mm.
Her animal totem is the owl, the screech
Yes.
owl specifically. So there's a lot of ways that she's been co-opted in throughout time. And
Yeah.
even modern media, you can find her popping up in different movies,
Yeah.
TV shows. It's
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah. Lilith was a character on the TV series Supernatural, I remember.
Mm,
I don't remember too much else about it. After 15 seasons, you kind of forget the early stuff. I know Lilith
yeah,
was in there.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I was curious about the witches, and I think witches will come back up because that's one of my interests. And witches are often associated with the dark goddess. But it was
Hmm.
when you were talking about women choosing not to want to be mothers, it there is a long, long history of, I'm probably going to mangle this word, abortificants.
Yeah.
I'll just restate that as, herbal brews, I suppose, or tinctures that can cause an abortion.
Hmm.
And that women have known about these and have used them. And many of these plants, it sometimes it's referred to as the poison path because that's what women, they
Yeah.
knew these herbs. And so that's why I was curious when you had mentioned that if she was maybe associated
Right.
with witches in that way.
Yeah. And if you look at midwives, the women as healers, that's part of what contributed to them becoming turned into witches,
Mm,
because the healers knew all these herbal remedies and plants and could do a lot with it. And when they are working with poisonous plants or doing these other practices, then yeah, that leads into our ideas of, the bad witch and witches,
mhm,
brewing these mixtures that are evil and wrong and in the dark and the shadows. And it's
mhm,
like, no, it's a warped memory
mhm.
of wisdom and skills that the midwives, the herbalists, the female healers held.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know this until I was doing research a couple months ago that there was that connection between witches and midwives, and that
Mhm.
during the Inquisitions, the midwives were often targeted. And it boggles my mind that there was a struggle, a very recent struggle, to get midwifery legalized.
Yes.
When I lived in Colorado, in particular in Colorado Springs. There was a woman that I met at community college, and that's what she was. She was a midwife, but midwifery was illegal in Colorado at the time. And that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And she was very active in trying to get it legalized, which eventually
Yeah.
it was in the state. But I just couldn't wrap my brain around the fact that that would be illegal.
Yeah. Yeah. And even where it is legal, it doesn't necessarily connote respect,
Right.
because I know of stories where the midwife is disrespected, treated rudely, or even ejected from birth rooms,
Mm-hmm.
and is not seen as having any valuable knowledge by the current medical establishment. And so there's still that pushback and this, I don't know, incorrect misinterpretation, misinformation, that that's dangerous and that you're really better off being with Western medical practices in a hospital. And for some, yes, that's true, but it's not a blanket statement. And midwifery is an ancient, well-respected, legitimate healing path.
Right. Right. And my understanding, if I can remember it correctly, that the suppression of midwives kind of went hand in hand with the development of sort of modern science and modern
Yes,
scientific techniques.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. My friend would tell me about people who would go to the court hearings and the legislative hearings as they were fighting for this. And even some women would go, and nurses would go in and just say all of this. What my friend said were just outright lies, propaganda, I think is what you said.
Mhm.
And, my midwife friend, she was very adamant about this. She's like, look, if I recognize that a woman needs serious medical attention, I'm going to make sure she gets it.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am not opposed to having her go to the emergency room if she needs it,
right.
so yeah. So that was Lilith. And are there any others that you are particularly fond of? Any other examples of the dark goddess?
Too many to name. I love them all. I know that you're interested in climate change
Mm-hmm.
and ecology and the environment, and that made me think of Demeter.
Yeah.
And so the story with her is her daughter was Persephone, and her daughter was out picking flowers in a field, and the ground opens up. Hades, the king of the underworld, god of the underworld, comes up, rips her down, abducts her to be his wife. And while she's down there, Demeter, her mother, is really upset. Like, she doesn't know what happened to her daughter. She just knows she's gone missing.
Mm.
And she starts this huge hunt, just traveling everywhere looking for Persephone, and is enraged and finds out what happens. And that, and Zeus agreed for Hades to take Persephone as his wife, and Demeter demanded her daughter back. And they were like, nope, sorry, it's already done. So Demeter, who's the goddess of the grain and, attached to fertility, said, fine, I'm taking the grain. No food will grow until my daughter is returned. And she brought famine to the land. And the gods freaked out, because if people don't have food, then people can't make offerings to the gods. So the gods lose out. So it was only then that they said, okay, Persephone can come back, but since she already ate something in the underworld, it's usually said like 3 pomegranate seeds, she can only come back for a portion of the year and then has to return. So that explained the seasons, why in fall and winter, as everything's, dying and withdrawing, that's when Persephone is left and Demeter is in mourning. And then spring is when she returns and Demeter is happy and everything starts blossoming and blooming. And so I thought of that because of when we're talking about like these climate changes and these changes and these crises that we're in and the famine. And for me, dark goddesses, one of the things they do is they balance the scales.
Mm,
When things have tipped too far, they step out and by any means necessary will rebalance.
mm,
And it makes me think of the way that we're treating the earth and just all the abuse and all of the destruction and bringing in the famine. I can't help but think of the dark goddess and this rebalancing of, okay, like if that's what you're going to do, then I'm taking back until this gets shifted
mm,
and there's an adjustment made. And yeah, so a lot of dark goddesses are coming in for the balance. And also Sekhmet,
mm,
ancient Egyptian goddess, who's known as, she's connected with the desert sun, just the searing heat. And while the sun can be life-giving, it can also kill you. And so Sekhmet is seen to have these benevolent and also fierce aspects. So in one form, she is considered a healer, and in others, she was called upon to exact justice when humans were no longer following balance and justice. She came out and just started eating and rampaging and taking out everyone because they had upset the balance.
mm,
So again, you see, and she's connected with this, specifically this hot desert sun.
mm.
She's tied in with the environment.
Right. I think many of the goddesses were, and this is opening up a lot. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to Demeter, but the first thing that comes up to my mind, I just wanted to share, is years ago, I had this idea that's still kind of in the back of my brain. One of my obsessions have been UFOs and all the
Mm,
things. And I like to do a sort of archetypal reading on them.
okay.
And so I had this whole scenario of different aspects. I was looking at it archetypally, but one of the main ones was the phenomena of crop circles, which
Mm,
I tied to Demeter because they were happening in the crops. And I'm like, maybe it's not even aliens or something that is providing these or creating them. Maybe they're messages from the goddess herself,
mm-hmm.
the body of the earth. It's trying to get our attention and in the crops.
I love that.
So,
I love that so
yeah,
much.
yeah. So I just had to share that. But going back to this story of Demeter and Persephone, by the way, do you know what Persephone, the name, literally means?
It's not coming to me at this moment. I know at one point I did, but I'm
Well,
not.
this is what I've learned. This is why I asked, because
Okay.
but what I learned was Persephone means the bringer of destruction.
Yes. Yes. Well, she becomes the queen of the underworld.
Yeah.
And there's some scholarship that says she might predate Hades, that
Mm,
he was an afterthought, that it was actually her completely ruling the underworld, and then Hades came in as her husband
mm,
later,
mm,
as a later addition. And so, again, going back to Demeter, at one point in her rage, that is said to bring on the Arañes. And the Arañes are this class, these female spirits sent out to seek justice.
right.
And specifically when it comes to murder within families.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's been, if a brother murders a brother or a son, a father murders a child, or whatever, the Arañes show up to demand justice.
Mm,
That this is not okay, which again is tied to Demeter and this familial bond and ferocity around don't mess with my family.
mm,
And and again, that those are dark goddesses. Those are goddesses that will not be appeased and that are out for blood and seek retribution and not revenge.
right.
It is not revenge. It is restitution. It is creating an equilibrium. You took this, it needs to be balanced out.
Right, right. And the Furies were, I've heard two different, or I've read two different places where they may have been born or who they were daughters of. And one was Gaia, that they were the daughters of Gaia. And the other was, speak of the dark goddess, daughters of night.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that. And I see now that, Gaia seems to be rather furious. We have to deal.
Yes.
Was there any way of, I guess the only way of placating the Furies was to ensure that balance returned, to make amends?
Yes. And as soon as it was, they immediately disappeared. They were, okay, our job is done here. So it's not like they stayed and hung out and just kept feeding off of it. They just wanted balance restored.
Right. Now, with the story of Demeter, it also involves, she's not a major player in it, but it's one of my favorite examples of the dark goddess, which is Hekate.
Yes.
And she's the only one, her and the sun were the only ones that knew something had gone awry with Persephone. And one of the things I was thinking of, one, I know that Hekate is associated with witches.
Yes.
We see this
Queen
in
of the
Macbeth.
Witches.
Yeah, we see it in Macbeth with the three weird sisters, that they are invoking Hekate. And she's also associated with root magic and that poison path, but also the crossroads.
Yes.
And I think that is also very telling with, symbolic of our current, we're at the crossroads. Now I'm a little bit more along the lines of, the crossroads, we took the wrong path. They're behind us. We ignored Hecate at our own peril, but she was also associated with the underworld. I think that it was said that she held the keys to the underworld.
Yes. And she's associated with torches as the light bringer. So even though she's in the darkness, she holds the key and she holds the light.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, two things that I learned about Hecate, and I was trying to find a reference to these and I couldn't find them. So, but I trust the source. But one was that Hecate was eternally pregnant, that she was always pregnant. And this fits into that sort of the triple goddess motif, but that that she was the crone, but the new, the maiden was always, the potential was always there. And I don't know about that. I can't imagine being eternally pregnant. I don't think any woman would ever want to be eternally pregnant. But the other thing that I learned about her is that she would splash around barefoot in the river, and this was in the underworld. She'd splash around barefoot in the rivers of pain and misery. And while she did that, she laughed the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she knows the underworld.
Yeah. When she, also understands that all that we can really do in the face of all of our sufferings and everything is kind of laugh at them.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though you mentioned, that you feel that the crossroads are way behind us where we should have taken a different path. Yes. And there's always new crossroads being put before us. So there's always the opportunity of, are you going to take a different path? So even within that suffering and the play and the laughter and the misery, then there's the crossroads of, what do you choose next?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. So thank you for that. Yeah, I tend to be pessimistic with, especially in terms of our many, 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 many environmental crises. And so she with the underworld represents all of those things that it can represent the unconscious. It's all of those things that we're repressing and that we need to, and if she is eternally pregnant, it represents those things that we need to give birth to.
Yeah. Well, so the underworld is associated with dark, and darkness precedes light and creation.
Right.
So the dark of the new moon precedes the full moon coming. The dark void is that out of which all of creation is made. The dark of the womb is what grows the child before they emerge into the light. So, and it also shows like there's not these duality, opposites of it's either dark or light, but the two are intertwined. The two feed into each other and off of each other and interact with each other, and that is what we need. And so another dark goddess is Ereshkigal
Right.
when in the myth of Inanna, and she's the queen of the underworld. And while Inanna's down there, Ereshkigal is in labor pains,
Hmm.
and she is, screaming out and giving birth. So again, we have in the underworld, in the dark, in the death, is new life happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't there I'm not sure how I want to word this, but again, it's this, not the duality, but it's the, both and the womb and the tomb.
Yes.
That it's the, we come out from the underworld, we come out from the womb, but then
Mhm.
at the end, we all return to the earth. We
Yeah.
all return to the underworld.
Right. And the ancient great goddess, that's how she's known as, the womb and the tomb. And there's these ancient burial sites that are actually constructed like going back into the womb. And there's some on Malta that actually, when you look up an aerial view, you can see the body of the goddess. And the entryway in for the burial is actually, between her legs, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that a lot of, early worship, or I don't even want to say worship, but maybe spiritual practice and even philosophical practice occurred in caves,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
yeah, I think it was,
Caves remained sacred
yeah.
throughout multiple cultures, and caves were also the point of oracular activity,
Mm-hmm.
connection with spirits, with wisdom, with crossing those, keeping a foot in each world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Very much so. So the other dark goddess that I'm really familiar with, that I really like, is in India. And
Mm,
we can look at kind of the connection, but both Durga and Kali. I think
yeah,
most people associate Kali with the dark goddess, but I think Durga is also a bit of a dark goddess.
yeah, yeah. And we've got the ferocity there. And
Mhm.
Kali was in one story born
Mhm.
from Durga's third eye to take care of demons running wild.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, like if Durga is birthing Kali, then you can't say she's not tapped into the dark goddess herself.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. My understanding, she was the embodiment of the rage of Durga,
Hmm.
right?
Yes,
Um,
Kali was.
yeah. And what I always found interesting is that with Durga, in her dark aspect, it was her wrath was against the wicked, and her purpose, her wrath was, focused against the wicked, and the wicked were those people who were oppressing others.
Hmm.
And that there is also this, and I liked this, and I think this is really important, because this, my understanding of the story of Durga is that there was a demon, Mahis Asura, Mahi
Hmm.
Asura, I'll just say, I'm probably mispronouncing that, that had performed all of these boons. And this is the way these stories always work, right? That there's some demon that performs all these boons to get some reward, and some god's like, okay, well, you get what you asked for. And that causes all sorts of troubles. And
Hmm.
so what this demon asked for was, I don't want to be killed. He wanted immortality. And I think he was making all these boons to Brahma, one of the creator gods. And Brahma's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And then the demon's like, okay, well, how about this? No woman will kill me. And he asked for that because he thought that women were too weak, that no woman could ever possibly kill him. What was interesting, though, is that the gods couldn't kill him either.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Or actually, I mistook that he has to only be killed by a woman, because and that meant that no male god could kill him. So I misspoke that. But the god that Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, they created Durga to take care of it. And I like that in the sort of a symbolic way, because it's saying, no, women do have the power to do this.
Yeah. And it's they were invoking the fierce feminine, which
Yeah,
is the dark goddess.
right.
And the dark goddess is also the dark mother. You know,
Hmm.
she's not bringing destruction and death and ferocity just because it's fun.
Right.
She's bringing it out of a sense of care for her children,
Hmm.
care for balancing things out, for righting wrongs, for wiping out wickedness. It's not just violence and death for the sake of it.
Right, right. And I think there's this idea as well is that you sometimes have to have destruction before you can have creation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like if we look at Hawaii and Pele, the volcano goddess, and when she erupts and that lava flows through, like it destroys absolutely everything in its path. But after it's done, that's some of the most fertile soil ever. Like regrowth happens in this huge, prolific amount. And so, yes, death precedes creation, destruction precedes creation. Destruction can be generative.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's this aspect then, I think, of time. And
Hmm.
Kali is associated with time. And it's interesting because Kali's name also means black,
Yeah.
so you've got the black and the time. And, one of the things I like about Kali, because when you see Kali, she is a ferocious looking goddess. Yeah,
Hmm.
she's got that tongue's always hanging out to lap up the blood of her victims. She's got that garland of skulls. She's
Yeah.
got arms for her skirt, but yet she's so beloved.
Yeah.
Kali Ma,
Yeah.
Kali Ma.
And there are different versions of her. There is
Mhm.
not one Kali.
Right.
So there's different versions and she is honored in different ways by different people. So it's not just one,
Mm.
but the one that we're most familiar with is that dark, ferocious
Mm.
being who, even then, like when you break down the symbology of the different pieces, it's beautiful and it's amazing. Like each thing means something different. You know, the hands, the arms around her belt is karma, and it's just she can be broken down in every little detail. And the
Mhm.
blackness is also again the void,
Mhm.
time and that which time came out of. It's fertility, it's the starting point.
Yeah. 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 And I think that often we forget that with fertility and birth, it starts in darkness. I
Hmm.
had someone on once, Lynn Haupt, and something that she noted was that most of life happens in darkness. Even under the soil, the soil is alive. There's all these bacterias
Hmm.
and worms and other bugs and everything.
Yeah.
And that's what supports us.
Yeah.
Life happens in the darkness.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of Kali, I actually have a couple of things I want to say. So one's about Kali, and then I want to say something. I want to go back to the goddess as the underworld. So
Hmm.
just asking you to keep me on track here. So with Kali, Kali is also associated with Tantra.
Yes.
And I was thinking in terms of, Tantra, there's this, the word Tantra means to expand, but it's also kind of connected to weaving and a
Hmm.
thread, which made me think of is it the Moira, the Fates,
Hmm.
but also this idea of Tantra. I think in the West we have a skewed version of Tantra,
Yes.
but Tantra is very embodied.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to take a moment or two and talk about the goddess and this idea of being embodied.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of the goddesses, they are embodiment. They are here, now, the earth, life, sex, living.
Mm.
They're not some transcendent god who's not even engaged with the earth, but waiting until after we're done. It's not the separation. they're very much embodiment. And with Tantra, yes, we in the West, we have a very misguided understanding.
Mm.
And what we think we know is very, very tiny and not completely correct. And Kali is associated with the left-handed path. And the left-handed path is where they are embodied. They are actually doing the practices. Because in the right-handed path, you're doing visualizations. So for example, in the right-handed path, you can visualize having sex for this, purpose and enlightenment and merging with divinity. And the left-handed path, you actually do it.
Mm.
In the right-handed path, you think about drinking wine, and the left-handed path, you drink it.
Mm.
And the left-handed path is specifically working with taboo substances according to the, Hindu beliefs or understanding. So it's not just anything, it's 5 specific
Right.
substances. And the left-handed path, the path with Kali, is you're actually doing it. You're engaging with it. You're embodying it. You're not just thinking about it. And yeah, embodiment shows up with all of them. And another piece that I love about the dark goddesses is their connection to sex.
Mm.
They they enjoy getting physical and having play and joy in their bodies and no shame, no apology. They know what they want
Mm.
and they go for it. And it's another piece of embodiment that's a wonderful thing to enjoy.
Yeah. Oh no, we can't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that I could just see, in my head I've got, patriarchy, like embodied of patriarchy. It's like, oh no, oh no.
No. Yeah.
Can't do
Gotta
that,
lock
can't do
that
that.
down.
Yeah.
Can't go there.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I like about Tantra as well is that I forget where I got this. I think it was George Feuerstein. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I think he referred to it as like a religion for a new age, or even a religion for a dark age,
Yeah.
and that things are so messed up that it requires something quite radical.
Yeah.
And that there's this aspect of Tantra that is violating taboos.
Yes.
Which is what you were just talking about. That
Yes.
violates all of these taboos that we have. And it's also disruptive. It's disruptive to the order. And that's what we need right now.
And that's what's happening. And we are in the age of the Kali Yuga. So this is where we are. And I also want to mention that, again, going back to Tantra and how little we understand, the West really grabs onto the sex piece, and that is a very minor piece, and it happens after many years of study and practices and discipline. Tantra isn't about let's have sex and let's have amazing sex in its original form. Sex is part of the path, and it's not necessarily for everyone.
Right.
Even in the tantric teachings, they say this path is not for everyone.
Right.
It's known as the lightning path, and it can like blow your circuits if you're not adequately prepared. And again, it's a much broader, bigger practice than what we in the West know.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I talk about Tantra in class, I have a very difficult time talking about it because one, I just don't know enough about it. And it's, and I want to be able to speak cogently about it, but it's esoteric. So it's kind of difficult because you really have to be initiated into the tantric practices.
Yes.
But that also seems to be a feature of many of the, I don't know if we want to call them religions. I think it goes beyond our understanding now, certainly not necessarily organized religions, but the religious activities centered around the goddesses and the dark goddess were always initiatory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they were experiences.
Yes.
And immediately my mind goes to the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yeah.
that was going on for more than 1,000 years. There was a vow of secrecy, which is amazing that it was kept. So far, we have not discovered anything in writing that talks about the core activity of the mysteries, what actually happened. Everyone kept and honored the vow of silence, but it was life-changing. And the culminating ritual, I believe, was in a cave, or it was enclosed, it was dark, it was this whole experience, which some scholars believe that there were psychotropics involved, or other things. But over and over again, people said that once they went through it, they no longer feared death.
Right.
And the Eleusinian mysteries are connected with Demeter and Persephone. Persephone is the queen of the underworld. And so something happened with the goddesses, with the dark goddesses, with death, that brought people out into a place of fearlessness and peace. I don't know, acceptance. And that's facilitated by these dark goddesses. And people actually engaged in something.
Right.
It wasn't just talking about it. It wasn't philosophical. It was embodied.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I love researching the Eleusinian mysteries. And the Telesterion, I think is what it was called. That was the main temple. And it was unlike any other Greek temple because all the Greek temples were open. This was entirely enclosed. It was entirely enclosed. But this embodiment, it gets me back to the thing I wanted to say. And I'm glad that we're doing this out of the context of the Eleusinian mysteries, because I see that this is one of the issues that we're facing in the world, is this, especially in terms of the Western religious traditions, that we've denied the physical and have put all of our emphasis, or many people and the history of our culture has instead put the emphasis on this transcendental reality.
Yes.
And it seems like it is this fear of death. It is this fear of the body. And that's one of the ways that I see the dark goddess as being so necessary, because she tells us, don't fear death.
Right.
Don't fear the body. Don't fear being an embodied being.
Yeah. And part of that fear comes from the separation from life. Again, the goddess is womb and tomb. Death is not the end. Death is very connected with life. And so it's not the same relationship when you have the goddess embodied, bringing death and fearlessness, and that connects to life. Again, like destruction preceding creation. It's just another opportunity for creation to continue in a different way.
Yeah. It's a message that I think that we all need. And it, tying it back to the environmental situation right now, I think so much of that has been caused by us denying being embodied.
Yeah.
And refusing to recognize our own sort of animal natures.
Yeah. And denying the embodiment of the earth. And not just embodiment, but I believe ensoulment of the earth. And that it's a relationship. And we've forgotten that it's a relationship.
Right.
Yeah. And not a resource. I mean, it's, yeah, there's so many ways in which we've disconnected and separated and forgotten.
Right.
Because the further back you go in history with these more ancient cultures, or even current day indigenous cultures, they stayed connected. There was the balance.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. When I was thinking also, this is the last thing I'll say about Tantra, but I think a feature of Tantra is this teaching of interconnection.
Yes. Absolutely. And not just interconnection, but, and this is why, one of the reasons why you engage with taboo substances and activities is that the divine divinity, the sacred is inherent in everything.
Yeah.
It is not separate. It is not, well, these things are sacred, but these things aren't. And if you can find and connect with the sacred in something taboo or that you consider dirty or wrong or nasty, if you can connect with the sacred in that, then you're plugged in and recognizing it everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it recognizes the necessity, Shiva and Shakti. You have to
Mm-hmm.
have both. You have to have, Shakti, the feminine energy,
Yeah.
is what vivifies.
Yeah.
The goddess.
There's a saying that Shiva without Shakti is just a corpse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of the images of Kali. She's standing on the corpse of Shiva and kind
Yes.
of, animating him, I think.
Yeah. And he's the one that keeps her grounded enough that she doesn't completely go off and destroy everything
Right.
and bring everything to annihilation.
Yeah.
So they're working with each other. They need each other. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and that brings to mind another question, because we've been focusing on the dark goddess, and the dark goddess, there was definitely this repressed and
Hmm.
suppressed and oppressed female, but we also need the masculine as well.
Hmm.
And so, what is the role of the masculine with the dark goddess?
Well, if you look back at different stories and mythologies, especially older fertility ones,
Mm.
the goddess gives birth to the son who grows up and becomes her consort, dies, and gets born again. And so it's this cyclical pattern
Mm.
of being born of and partner to. So I believe there's a dynamic relationship. It's not static. It's not, well, the masculine shows up in this one way for the feminine, or the masculine only does this. I believe it's a fluid, dynamic interaction. And like with Shiva and Shakti, there's a balancing of the chaos and the fluidity and the all of this movement with groundedness, with form, with bringing in stability, and the two work together. If we just focus on one, we go out of balance again and things go sideways.
Right.
And which I think is the resurgence of the goddess, whether we're talking dark or otherwise, is because we've so over focused on the masculine and developing the masculine that the tables have tipped. And so now it's like, nope, we need to rebalance
Mm.
with the goddess. Again, the goddess comes in to balance. And in that way, I believe initially it's her taking the lead
Mm.
and the masculine coming in to support that,
Mm.
to support the change, to support the rebalancing, to support what needs to be done. And the feminine isn't just related to females.
Right.
There's the feminine within men, the feminine within everything. It's not limited to biological identified women.
Right.
The feminine is a force, is an energy. And society and cultures are the ones who ascribe certain traits and qualities to it
Mm-hmm.
so that we can understand it. But it's not limited to that. And the
Right.
suppression, like you mentioned, the repression, suppression, oppression of the feminine also happens within men.
Right.
And because the culture has told them too that you want nothing to do with the feminine, anything that's considered feminine within you, you need to get rid of. You need to suppress, repress. It's not okay. We need you to be completely in your masculine. And that's not healthy for anyone.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I think it's something that is not recognized often, but that patriarchy hurts men too.
Yes, absolutely. And you also have women who support patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
There are women who have opted in to that belief system, to that structure, to that power over. So it's not this dividing line of men versus women.
Right.
It's not.
We call those women Serena Joy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, she's the,
It's
from the Handmaid's Tale, she is the embodiment of the woman who supports patriarchy.
hmm yeah. And
Yeah.
it's at this point, we need to focus on the change that elevates, empowers, and heals all
Mm-hmm.
instead of finger pointing.
Right.
We can't keep doing the whole, well, it's your fault, or it's because of this, or if that had been different. It No, like, let's focus here and now.
Mm.
We are at the crossroads.
Right.
Forget about the crossroads behind us. We
Yeah.
can't revisit that. Like,
Right.
what are we going to choose now? And it
Yeah.
takes all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and it reminds me also of, I mean, we have to incorporate this dark goddess, psychologically. And it reminds me of Athena and Medusa,
Yes,
where you're familiar with the relationship between the two of them, I assume.
I love them, and I love what immediately pops into my mind when you say that is Athena with her shield, with
Uh-huh.
Medusa like huge and loud and in the center of it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Well, wasn't it on her chest? Didn't she wear, I don't know if it was the actual head of Medusa, but it
no.
was, wasn't it Athena that actually caused Medusa to become this sort of monstrous figure, because she had been a beautiful woman, if I remember them.
hmm
It's been a long, long time, but I think Poseidon seduced her in Athena's temple. And Athena's like, oh no, not going to have
no.
that. So you are
Yeah.
now, beast with, snakes and everything. But eventually Athena, who is kind of the, she was born of the head of Zeus, the head of her father, but that she had to eventually incorporate what she had rejected and created in a way.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Medusa herself, from her head, it is said that one stream of her blood is poison and kills, and one stream is the elixir and heals.
Mm,
And so, which side you take from?
mm,
So the one contains both the curse and the blessing,
mm,
which we see in other goddesses who are the goddesses of disease, who
mm.
both bring the disease and cure the disease.
Right. Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. So I'm curious. You've kind of answered some of these questions, I think. But where do we go? I mean, we're facing a lot of challenges right
hmm
now, and it seems like the dark goddess is asking something of us all.
Yeah.
And what exactly do we need to do? How can we help achieve this balance, do you think, and honor the dark goddess?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is action.
Mm,
The dark goddess does not lay around and repose and just hang out. She is a goddess of action.
mm,
And so the rebalancing can only come from taking action,
right.
whether it's social justice or, ecological activism or anything. It's taking action.
Mm,
And yeah, for me, the two biggest things are the rebalancing and taking action. Taking
yeah.
action,
Yeah.
seeing that things are not okay, and let's do something about it. And the dark goddesses also embody rage,
Mm-hmm.
and rage is a fuel. It's a propellant of look at what's going on, and let's get angry about it, because the anger is a lot of times when people will act.
Right.
I'm really pissed off about this. What can I do?
Yeah.
How can I change it? How can I be involved? Where can I fix it?
Yeah.
So for me, the dark goddess is recognize the imbalance,
Mm.
get angry about it, and go take action.
Yeah. And I see a lot of people not taking action or not taking effective action. And I think that is a key. It has to be effective action. I was, social media, I saw, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, a lot of people, especially a lot of women, there was this resignation of sorts of somebody needs to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, okay, do it. And, one of the comments that I always made is that, look, gathering together once a year with your knitted pussy hats, that doesn't do it. It may have made you feel good temporarily, but it ultimately was really kind of ineffective. What
Yeah.
are you going to do? What are we going to do about this?
Yeah. And that's bubbling up. The rage is bubbling up, and more are tapping into the anger of, wait a minute, like, what?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Right.
No. And so there is that initial shock
Mm-hmm.
where there is the pause of, I'm trying to process right now what is happening. And then comes the awakening rage. And okay, no, 'cause I promise you, action is coming.
Yeah.
Action is rising up. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, we need that. And it seems, I don't know exactly where the dark goddess fits into this, but I'm pretty sure she does somewhere. So maybe you can help me with this. But when I think about the environmental crisis and many of the crises that we have, it often seems to me that way too many of us live in illusion and don't recognize the severity of what we're facing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I understand, we have to look at, the role of patriarchy and all this and how, industrial capitalism, which I think is a product of patriarchy, but that's a big driving force of our environmental crises. But individually, there's not a lot we can do, but we can do some things. We can get angry, we can get active.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the primary things we can do is stop eating meat or severely limit our meat. And one of the things I read was apparently those who followed Hekate, they were all vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
And Demeter, the grains,
Yeah.
and in Genesis 1, where we have Lilith, not named in Genesis 1, but in that, God actually says, okay, you have all the fruit and all the grains that you can eat. Never once says, and you can eat the animals too.
Have a barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I just kind of threw that out there because it seems to me that is just one way of that we can do something kind of meaningful. And there seems to be a grounding in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when you mentioned about how much we're still living in illusion,
Mm.
I thought of Kali again
Yeah.
and the swords that she wields and the swords to cut away illusion.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Wake up.
Yeah. 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 We're in darkness and we need that light. We need the light. We need to wake up. We need to, cut off that ego head, wake us
Yes.
up. And we need that torch of Hecate
Yeah.
and everything. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Vivien, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This was an amazing conversation. What are you up to? What do you have? What are you working on?
Oh, well, I love all of this, and so I'm constantly working on something new and creating something new. The biggest project right now is my mystery school
Mm.
and creating that community to teach about the goddesses, and whether you look at them as archetypes or whether you look at them as consciousness that you can interact with, there's still value in their message and how they model for us our own strength, our own action, our feelings, our so many different ways. So the school is what I've built to help awaken that in women and to rediscover the divine feminine, the womb and tomb, the embodiment, that the feminine way of living, being, and doing, and connecting with the sacred.
Mm.
So that from that, I'm constantly creating new offerings and new programs and new courses based in that. And it's my font. I love creating. So there's always something new. So really that's the big container
Mm.
that everything grows up out of.
Okay.
And within the school, there's a free membership that will always be free to access a certain level of resources. And then there's a monthly paid membership, which is more intimate, which gets access to even more and is more engaging. Like you're working with me, with the other faculty, with live people, whereas the free is, all recorded, kind of, do it yourself.
Right.
But the monthly group is hands-on,
Mm.
and we gather a few times a month
Okay.
online.
All right. And where can people go to find the Women's Mystery School?
It's www.womensmysteryschool.org. So
Okay.
O-R-G.
All right. I'll put a link to that in the show notes in the video description.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Is there anything that, in regards to the dark goddess, that you think that we missed, or
That you and I missed in our conversation?
Yeah. I mean, we had a pretty wide-ranging conversation. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we got everything.
There's always more, but I feel like we hit the main points,
Yeah.
and each one in itself can just unravel in a whole other
Yeah.
conversation and discussion.
Right.
So I think we did good.
Okay.
Yay
Good.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we did good too. Yeah. Yay us. All right. Well, Vivien, again, thank you so much. I truly enjoyed this. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me. I love talking with you. I really enjoy everything you put out, your wisdom, your thought process, your insight. It's all really wonderful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very, very much.
Yeah.
I try. All right. And that's a wrap on episode 49 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're a part of my YouTube audience. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive rating on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. It only takes a second, and your 5-star ratings really do help, especially if you listen on Apple. If you have a minute to spare, please consider posting a short but positive review, and please consider subscribing. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed when I upload new content. Also, if you think a friend, family member, or even coworker might like this podcast, please share it with them. Right now, that is one of the best ways to help me with the podcast. I really do need to grow the audience. I also have a PayPal link set up if you would like to make a one-time donation. And as I keep saying, you can still be the first person to do so. The link for that is in the show notes or the video description. I'm also going to be launching a Patreon within the next few months. I have a lot of plans for Rebel Spirit beyond the podcast. I do want to create more video content for the YouTube channel, and I'm planning some live stream episodes. The first will be with returning guest Dr. Sharon Kogan, where she will offer a Jungian analysis and interpretation of dreams for participants. We're still working on scheduling this, but it will likely be near the end of October. So be sure to follow Rebel Spirit Radio on Facebook and or sign up for the newsletter at rebelspiritradio.com so you can be informed of all future live events and the launch of the Patreon. implementing all of this is going to take a lot of time and resources. So anything you can do to help will be greatly appreciated. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.